All right. Today is not just another episode. This is a moment. I've been having a moment for a while now. It hurts. It really, really, really hurts. Today is not just another conversation. I can feel it. I can feel Malcolm X. And 60 years ago today, Malcolm X was assassinated at the age of 39 years old. Now, I'm 39 right now. Sitting here trying to honor a man whose life still moves me, still breaks my heart. I think about the parallels in our struggle. I said in a meeting earlier today that some of the things that I say that Malcolm X said 60 years ago could have gotten me killed, and today still can, depending on where I'm at. It's hard to put into words how much it hurts that our leaders, our visionaries, were killed off like just pieces in a game. One by one, Malcolm, Martin, Medgar, Nipsey, leaders who didn't just fight for freedom, they carried the weight of an entire people's hope on their backs. Malcolm X was more than just a revolutionary. He was a man who rose from unimaginable pain. Malcolm lost his father to white supremacy early on before he became Detroit Red, and he lost his mother to the system. And then Malcolm lost his freedom to incarceration. And I've been reading, I went back and took a look at Manning Marable's text that he wrote on Malcolm X as not just a revolutionary, but a man, and how important he was to the struggle that we experience, not just as Black people, but people from underprivileged communities around the world. People often forget that Malcolm X was impacted by the justice system outside of just COINTELPRO and some of the things that he experienced, being tracked by the CIA and the FBI incessantly, having his homes bombed, having his children threatened. And one of the things that I love about Malcolm is that he transformed his pain into purpose. And when I think about that, I think about the work that he did, not only in the Nation of Islam, but after his work with the nation, giving back, going and working with youth, training them, taking that pain that he went through in the justice system and really transforming it into an awakening that allowed him to pour into young people, that allowed him to pour into his community. Malcolm emerged as this leader who stood for truth, for dignity, for empowerment, even when it literally costed him everything. And here I am, 39 years old, on the anniversary of his death, feeling the weight of that loss like it just happened. I wasn't in the Audubon, but I feel it. I know that he's with me. In some ways, his death did just happen. We're still losing leaders. We're still carrying the grief of what was taken from us too soon. And so the big question for you guys as you're listening and we bring on Brother Fred is, what happens when our brightest lights are extinguished too soon? What do we lose as a community when our leaders are stolen from us? And how do we carry on that legacy while also healing from the grief that we're experiencing? And this is why today's conversation with Fred matters so much. His story reminds me of Malcolm's in a way. How pain and struggle can either destroy you or it can push you toward transformation. Fred, like Malcolm, I think faced the crushing weight of the system early on in his life. Malcolm started getting arrested around 16. I think that there's some parallels in Fred's life that we'll talk about. And instead of being broken by it, the work that we see Fred doing today is that he's chosen to lead with purpose, to heal people who are in similar situations as he was in, and to help others find their way forward after incarceration. So today, we're not just talking about grief, we're talking about how Black men, how Black people, how people in general who are returning from jail and prison, especially those who are out here in California, which we know is its own beast, how they carry these hidden losses that the world doesn't see. We're talking about healing, we're talking about brotherhood, and we're talking about redemption. As I got ready for this last night, I went and hung out with Dream Hampton, who is the phenomenal creator of Surviving R. Kelly, among other documentaries, and who has a long history working, writing at the source. And for some reason, I was thinking about this song by Mary J. Blige and Ja Rule called Rainy Days, which comes from my growing up, my teen years. And one of the things I loved that Mary said was, well, Ja actually said this, um, smile and give me a reason to keep on believing that everything ain't misleading. And I kiss the cloud on them rainy days and smile for you when the skies are gray. Because I'm a teardrop away from crying and a few shots away from dying. Dear Lord, would you shower my pain? Let it rain on me. While I cherish the air I breathe, I'm an angel that can't soar, can't fly, and I mastered it. Lord knows why. That's what I think about when I think about Malcolm X. That's what I think about when I think about Fred. And I'm very honored and excited to have him in. So as soon as we get back from this, we're on with Fred. I'm glad I made it through that montage without crying because I didn't know what was going to happen today. But let's get back on it. I'll see you guys in a Okay, I want to remind you guys. I know that there's people tuning in from different places on the internet, and y'all know y'all got to help me out because we're getting better every week. But if you are on LinkedIn or on YouTube and you have a shout out for Fred, if you have questions, feel free to throw that into the chat, and we'll make sure that we ask Fred these questions. I'm really, really excited to have this brother on. Fred Griffin, certified peer support specialist, youth mentor, restorative justice advocate, arrested at 16 years old, sentenced to 30 years, but rebuilt his life, survivor of domestic violence, sexual abuse, and gang life, and the prison system overall. Now dedicated to helping justice involved individuals heal and reintegrate. He's an incredible facilitator, and I've seen him do this before, of post incarceration support groups in Los Angeles, which guide others through grief and transformation. Fred's story is one of resilience, transformation, and the power of second chances. Y'all, welcome in one of my former students who is taking over the world and who I'm proud to call a brother and a big part of my heart. So let's welcome in and give a virtual hand clap to Brother Fred Griffin.
Yeah.
Welcome, Fred. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're giving you the virtual hand clap. Welcome into this safe and wonderful space today. I'm really excited that I'm able to have you on. And, I was talking with Bruce McDaniel a few weeks ago, who I know that we're both close with. And, while we were talking, we resurrected your name and we sort of manifested you on to the Golden Light Academy today. So thank you for being here. I think we're going to have a great time talking today.
Absolutely.
Fred, let me ask you this. Who are you? Who is
Um,
Fred?
I think first and foremost, I want to say I'm a human being and I'm someone who carries the weight of causing harm to other human beings. And I want to start off this interview by acknowledging that, like, no matter how many accolades, no matter how much success I experience, no matter how many doors I walk into, I walk in carrying in the reality that I got here because I had to look deep within because I hurt other people. And I feel like that's important to start this conversation off because I want to pay homage to the people I've caused harm and their family members and those who may still be in pain. With that being said, I'm a person that's not healed. I'm healing. I'm a father. I'm a friend. I'm a mentor. I'm a mentee. Um, and ultimately, like, my goal is to remind people and invite people into a space where healing becomes a reality and not just something that we post about on social media. It's something that we strive for.
Beautiful. And that's what we do here at Golden Global is we really focus on people's healing. We want leaders who are authentic, who are able to do what the work that you're doing and take a look at what's happening for ourselves and where we can fix and continue this healing process so that we can impact the world. And something that you did right now just really resonated with me, and it was the selfless act of saying to the community, I know what I've done and I know what I'm
Mm.
committed to doing. It's a beautiful part of the healing process. So you're already a light. Now let's get into a little bit about what we're talking about. In particular, when we met over the phone, one of the parts of the conversation that stood out to me was you had this really strong and really insightful idea about something that's unique for people who have been incarcerated, which is the grief that they experience in different ways. So there's a grief, obviously, when people go inside.
Mhm.
You're literally leaving your family, your community, your children. But then for people who are returning home, there's
Yeah.
a grief that is missing. And then also, what does it mean to grieve after incarceration? How is that different? So this is my core topic. We talk about grief a lot because I've experienced so much of it in my own life, and so
Mm.
that resonated with me. I wonder for you, going back to young Fred at 16 when you were first sentenced, what did you feel that you lost in that moment, and how did you process that grief?
Mm. Um, I think in the moment of being sentenced, what I lost was this idea that my life was manageable, right? Like, I created all these masks, all these ideas and these facades. And when they sentenced me to 30 years, I remember going back into the prison, the waiting cell for the guards to come get me and crying. And it was the first time I felt like I allowed myself to feel that helplessness, that powerlessness, because I no longer was like trying to put on a facade. And I, to be honest, at 16, the way I dealt with it was I projected masculinity, right? Like, I got more violent, I got more aggressive, I act like it didn't matter. I refused to even think about, like, oh, I'm not gonna live that long anyway. I'm supposed to die at 18. Like, I had all of these defense mechanisms and these narratives that I had picked up along the way that were safeguarding me from feeling what I really felt was what I felt shame. I felt like I let my family down. I felt like I let my community down.
When you talk about shame, I think this is a thread that I've seen experience in Black men in general in different places, and not just people who are locked up, but it's one of those. It's the level of emotion that we experience, whether it's guilt because we couldn't provide the way that we
Mm,
wanted to, or it's the shame of actions that we've done, which could be related to a lot of our social conditions. So there's not a lot of grace for Black men.
mhm.
There's not a lot of this ability to say, even though I went through these things, even though we've experienced these hardships, there's also beauty in what we're doing now. And so hearing you talk about that shame, that is a universal theme. It is something that a lot of us have experienced. And a lot of times shame is rooted in trauma. Like when I think
Yes.
about my own shame that I had to unpack in a million years of therapy, a
Mm.
lot of it came through the traumas that I experienced as a kid, little James, like 4 or 5 years old. And so I wonder for you, do you think that some of the trauma you experienced as a kid started to come out around that time when you got arrested?
Um, I would say I had perfected my trauma responses around that time. My trauma more started coming out at the age of 6 when I started like stealing and lying and trying to get back at people who I felt was harming me. But because I was so small, I couldn't physically harm them. I would start stealing and lying and doing all these little conniving things, which was like my introduction into like criminal thinking. But I do think there's so much trauma I've experienced and didn't have spaces to where I could talk about it and process it, which itself was a shame, right? Because I'm feeling things that I'm not seeing being exhibited. I have emotions, I'm insecure, I'm sensitive, and that's not what I'm hearing. I'm hearing I gotta be tough. I'm hearing I gotta like, you black, you can't show emotions in society. They're gonna take advantage of you. You have to make sure that you like, prove your dominance and show individuals. And I'm a youth. I'm not understanding there's a time and a place to be assertive. There's a time and a place to be obedient and step back. So
Mm,
I overcompensated, right? Like, and then people are not knowing I'm being sexually abused. So in relation to the narrative I'm hearing, to the emotions I'm feeling, to the abuse that I'm experiencing, I concocted this idea that violence was going to solve all my problems. And that was like my introduction into like the gang life and violence. And, at 16, I had perfected wearing this mask so much I didn't even know who I was.
yeah. It's the mask that we wear. And we talk a lot about, even in pop culture, you can look at different artists and you can see like this is a facade. It's a mask that is being put on where playing a character a lot of times, and it's a lot of times for safety.
Yeah.
And the safety of Black men is really, really, really important, but people don't talk about that because a lot of people are scared of us.
Yeah.
So, hearing you talk about like that mask. Now, when you were incarcerated, were there certain griefs that you experienced that were unique to being incarcerated?
Um, Absolutely. It was for me, one of the first griefs I felt was going to a level 4 180 prison and realizing that I had worked to get there. Like that was one of my first griefs was like looking at the yard and seeing and saying to myself, this is what you wanted. And as a youth, I have been told you're either going to die or go to prison. Like I told that from a youth. And
Wow.
so at some point I believed it and I manifested it and I acted towards it. I remember working on hitting people up as a gang member. I remember working on the way I dressed. So one of my first griefs was like the loss of an illusion that I had like created in my mind. Another grief was I told myself my family didn't love me, no one cared about me. And when I was in prison, I saw the way it impacted my family, my immediate family, my friends. I have whole childhood friends who's like, from the day you got arrested, our neighborhood was never the same. And those were things I had to grieve. The person that they remember wasn't the person that I was when I got arrested.
Yeah, and so you're grieving but you're also feeling this weight of responsibility for the things that I left, the people that I left behind. And I'm hearing people talk about this. And so that then compounds and it builds on top of what you're already experiencing. And it's,
Mhm.
it's easy to see why people fall apart when they get inside, or when they experience like these compound levels of grief and shame and longing and betrayal and so many of those different things. I love that you use the word manifest, because I'm all up in uh,
Yeah,
that spiritual work
yeah.
that we do for ourselves, and I love that. I can already tell it's a part of you. So there's an emotional and a mental toll that happens for people when they go inside in many
Mhm,
ways. Now let's fast forward to you seeing the gate open, and you're going re-entering back into society. What is that like? And are there griefs that are specific to that?
mm, absolutely. Um, because I always say I am a product of many individuals who spoke life into me. And as I go throughout my journey, there are individuals who are seeing things in me that I didn't see, and they're mentoring me, they're taking me under their wing, they're protecting me from making decisions out of impulse. And I was getting released, I felt and still feel that there are people who are more genuine, who are more deeper in their growth and their transformation, who deserves their freedom more than myself. And
Wow.
that was the grief, right? Particularly, I was on a yard where 90% of the individuals there were serving life without the possibility of parole. And it was those individuals who created the groups who were like coming around, making sure that we were going. And I remember vividly one conversation asking this person, like, as it stands right now, you're going to die in prison. Why do you care that I change? And that individual cried and looked at me and said, because if I don't get a chance to go out there and make community better, it's my responsibility to make sure that you do. And it's people like that, like I get emotional even thinking about it. It's people like that that when I'm going home and they're like, hey, you fought for this, you deserve this. I'm thinking about those people and saying, just because their sentence was different than mine, because they were a different age, because they were different in a different county, they don't get the same opportunity as me. And that within itself caused me to feel shame at times. And that's why usually when I step into spaces and they ask me, how do you feel? I feel humbled.
I had to write some stuff down real quick because you just spit some bars there, and I already know I'm about to go off schedule. I know we're supposed to be talking about other things. This is a couple things that you said that I think are really important. Is that when you were coming out, you were feeling a sense of survivor's remorse, and like I just got chills in my entire body because this is very similar to what activists in the community also experience. I feel some form of survivor's remorse because all of my icons have been murdered, and I am still here able to step on stages and living with the benefits of them
Mm,
being killed so that I can say these things and be in spaces. And so for you, feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel bad because I'm thinking about the guys that rooted me on.
mhm,
Then when I hear you say that these men were celebrating you being able to get out and return home, it made me think about this idea that when one of us makes it, we all make it.
mm,
And how powerful it is that it may not be me today, but seeing you go out and do your thing and now
mm,
pouring into the community. Obviously they saw a light in you, so they knew your community needed you the same way that we
right,
see that. I saw that when you first joined our program, and I'm like, no, there's something different about this guy.
mm.
I think everybody can see that you have an aura and a light that is necessary to the healing of our people, and that's
I
probably what
received
those
that.
guys were seeing. But they also saw themselves in you. You give them hope.
Mm.
Like you being out here, it represents them because y'all were on the same yard together.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I
I
relate.
love that.
And I get emotional thinking about it because the reality is I am them. I am a younger version of them. A lot of them have sat me down and said, had I got it at your age, this is what I would want someone to do for me. And you know, it's been a journey, and it's often the struggle of like receiving those phone calls from my friends, and I'm like, hey, how come you haven't called me? And they're like, because we don't want you living in here.
Ugh.
And I have to sit there on the phone and listen to what they're saying and like, look, like enjoy your life, advocate, do what you can do. But the fact that you're out and being who you are is enough. And it oftentimes don't feel like it's enough because, you know, their families, their loved ones is waiting for them to come home. And that's the grief that I carry. And I often think about the people who open doors for me. Like I am right now benefiting from the decisions of people who said, I'm not going to speak to them. I'm gonna let Fred speak. They don't talk about that when they talk about prison. They talk about people being selfish. They talk about people being evil and
Wow.
violent. They don't talk about the people who say, hey, we have some people coming in today, and I think your story will really resonate with them. So for the next few weeks, I'm going to come and we're going to work on your story.
There's so much beauty in what you're talking about, which is this synergy and respect that is had between people who are down. Because the people who tell history are the ones who get to convince the world of how things were. And
Right.
so if it's told from the perspective of the warden, or if it's told from the perspective of the CO, you're going to have a very different understanding of who those men who are incarcerated are.
Hmm.
But when you sit and you talk to them and you think about, well, what were the conversations that happened? Who poured into you when you were thinking about ending your life? Who were the people who wrapped their arms around you and pushed you forward so that you can leave? See, I can't get onto that because then we're going to get into a sermon and we're not here to do that. But you're
Yeah.
really touching on some important pieces, which is I get why you feel like I'm leaving people behind who are important. How can what you're doing now
Mm.
be an inspiration for them maybe, or be something that they can look to as a light, the way that we saw Malcolm X and King and Medgar Evers and Fannie Lou Hamer and all these people who Nipsey, people who we looked at and said, you inspire us.
Hmm. Um, what I realize is I have to identify what exactly is I'm grieving, right? And it's community. That elusive word, that elusive reality that like, you know, we strive to create, but oftentimes we miss the mark because create community is rooted in being vulnerable and it comes with accountability. And what I've realized is like coming home step right back into my community. A lot of the people that I serve time with are now I'm working with. I'm in this fight to reframe the narrative of what it means to be an incarcerated individual, to be system impacted. And for me, that is the inspiration of like a lot of people inside in coming home are afraid that what they experience inside cannot be translated when they come home. Oh, life is too fast. People don't care about you. And the reality is that you can create what is inside of you around you if you're willing to take the first step. What that means for me is coming onto platforms like this, talking about being a survivor, talking about, you know, carrying the weight of being a person that caused harm, not shying away from the difficult conversations because I realize that these narratives exist because we're not at the table.
Mm,
These narratives exist because we're not the ones telling the story. And so, as long as I'm willing to materialize my experiences and make it in a way that people can understand that I'm not my worst decision, that is my gift. That is the way I process my grief. That is my contribution to society.
I love that. I think a lot of times we throw away people who don't fit the narratives that we think that they should. And I think that's part of what makes Detroit Red, Malcolm X, so impactful in our community is that we didn't throw him away. He was taken from us. And even though he went through this really difficult childhood, um, he was essential in our
Mm,
community. He was beloved. How many people are talked about 60 years after they die? And, it didn't matter. Like, I think him going to prison was a blessing in a sense because
mm,
it was what he did while he was in there. It's like what you were talking about earlier. Nobody talks about the transformation process, which is what it's really supposed to be. It's just when you have to deal with, see, I can't get into all this because I'll get canceled, but it's difficult because this man learned literacy while he was in prison.
mhm,
He read
mhm,
every single book that he could. He studied the dictionary. He joined the Nation of Islam. And then from that cocoon that he was in, when he emerged as a butterfly, he took care of his community. And
mm.
that's what I see you doing. Now, you talked about creating spaces, and I've had the privilege of seeing you in many different spaces. But this one in particular, I think, is a phenomenal space. When you talk about you don't have to, you can take the things that are on the inside and you can use those to create the same community when you leave.
Mhm.
Tell us about what you're doing here and why this is significant.
So in that picture, that's a post-incarceration support group down at the organization I work for. Is called the Prison Way, which is an amazing organization that really is more of a community center. We more highlight uplifting people who are system impacted in any way that we can, bringing holistic practices because we believe that the purest form of healing comes through human connection, right? And what happened was when I came home, one of the co-founders who I was also, he was a mentor of mine, and we've started time together. He was talking to me about the things I was experiencing, and I was sharing with him because 2 days after coming home, my 12-year-old cousin was murdered. And so the shame and grief that I was feeling was like so tangible and so real that he introduced the topic of post incarceration. And he introduced it to me in a sense that he wanted me to show myself grace because there was a 16-year deficit in lived experience. And here I was trying to find something to latch on to either criticize or beat myself down because I didn't know how to cope with something I had never experienced before. I
Yes.
experienced death, but I experienced death in the past as a gang member who numbed it, avoided it, or in prison where I hung up the phone and I was able to put it past me. But for the first time, death was in my face, and I was faced with the reality of what the lifestyle that I was living was still doing to my community. And when he gave me this to look into, it was liberating to see that there are symptoms that I was experiencing that could be named, because when you can name it, you can tame it, you can manage it. And as we spoke about it and we started to see that it was something common and wonder why the reentry population of community wasn't talking about this topic, we decided we should. And if there is a need, you provide that need. And so what we're doing at the Prison Way is we're highlighting the reality of what it means to come home. And yes, you're happy to come home. Yes, you feel blessed. Yes, freedom is amazing, but you're also overwhelmed trying to get to and from on public transportation. You're trying to figure out how to navigate family relationships and negative social obligations. You're trying to like deal with your imposter syndrome of like who you are and where you fit in the world. And we're creating a space saying not only can we relate, not only can we help you, but we'll walk with you. We will accompany you. We will encourage you. We will provide you with the resources that even if we don't have, we'll set you along the way because we believe in uplifting and empowering people. That's what's needed in our community.
I love that you talk about that. We talk about brotherhood a lot on this show. And one of the things I love, you're a certified peer. You went through our certified peer program that we built at
I did.
TTC College. And, you're already a great person. You didn't need a peer program to, become who you always were going to be. But I think some of the things that you guys learned were important about what is the difference between a counselor and a peer. The
Mhm,
peer model is a lot newer in healthcare in the sense of they realized that people were going through treatment in all different levels of medicine, but there weren't people who knew what their patients were going through, who knew how to translate things, who knew, when you come out and you're on parole, these are the things you got to worry about. Like, these are the
Mhm.
real risks. They didn't have people who would ride the bus with them to an appointment, or who would really help them to deal with some of the family issues that they had, because they were scared to talk about, hey, I've been in a gang and I don't use that clinical language that you guys like to
Mhm.
use. I need somebody
Mhm.
to talk to me like a real person.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
the benefit of having you. So, do you have any experiences in providing that kind of brotherhood that you think stand out for you?
Absolutely. There's one person in particular that I won't say his name just out of respect for his journey. But one of the things he says that resonated when he came into Prison Way is that there were people like me talking about the things I was going through in a way that we were not creating space for people to stay in like a victim mindset. We were saying we relate, we understand. However, these are the ways that we were able to counter it. And this is how we've got to where we are today. And I think that's important because for me, talking about mental health, talking about substance abuse, that was not a normal conversation, nor was it healthy. When it came up, it was always spoken of in a derogatory sense.
Yep.
And now being in these spaces, I grew up in Watts, California. When I speak, the average person doesn't know I grew up in Watts until I say it. And it becomes like, oh, how did you learn this? Or how did you do that? Oh, I learned that inside prison. And what I'm doing by saying these things is like, I am giving you a narrative, an alternative to what you've been told. Once in the hood, you're gonna stay in the hood. Once an addict, always an addict. No, you may always have these addictive urges, but you don't have to stay in that identity because if you identify as something, you will behave as such. And that is ultimately like that's been my experience of people who are like, thank you for humanizing this process. Thank you for meeting me where I'm at and still finding a way to nudge me to look at it differently. And that's really what the peer support specialist model is. It's not that I'm telling them what I've been through, is that
Yeah.
I can relate, but I can also offer you a different perspective just by asking the right question.
Okay, let me ask you this, Brother Fred. Do you think Malcolm X might have been one of the original peer support specialists?
Absolutely. All of our heroes, in a sense, have been peer support specialists because their lived experience directly motivated their contribution to society.
Wow. Wow, this is the first time I think I've ever thought about it in that context. And I've written all these articles and curriculum, but they were the model for what we're talking about. These are
Mhm.
people who, when I think about Malcolm X, this is somebody who, yeah, they were fly. They had their fur hats and stuff, but this was also somebody who would put on, a t-shirt and some cargo pants, and who would go down and hang out with the unions, and who would have lunch on the construction sites. These are people who were in the hood, and I'm not talking about,
Yes,
South Los
yes,
Angeles. I'm talking about
yes.
in the projects,
Mhm.
in Chicago, in Detroit, lifting people up, saying, I'm not scared of you. I don't, I believe that I can show up for you the way that you need somebody to show up for you.
Yeah,
That's
I
powerful.
agree. When you think of leadership, oftentimes there is a distinction that's made. Like, hey, once you get to a certain level of leadership, and it happens within hierarchy as well, there's a disconnect between the people that you're attempting to lead. If you think of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all these individuals that we look to as examples, every single one of them refused to disconnect from the people. They
Yes.
refuse to send people to go do what they themselves would do, which is community service, engage the youth, go and fight for the civil rights of their people because they wanted to show people this is what it looks like because there were so many narratives out here, and there still are, that
Now
are not healthy.
that's interesting because, initially, both of them, both Dr. King and Malcolm X, changed their minds on several things throughout their lives, but nobody talks about that. They only talk
Yes.
about sort of these glorified images of a certain part of their life. But that
Hmm.
was one of Malcolm X's earliest criticisms of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and like all of these different councils was he felt like, well, you guys are up in these towers and you're making decisions about the people, but we're down here and I just got chills. We need somebody who's like on the ground with us. And what you're talking about is that that's exactly what Dr. King was doing. You
Yeah.
know, he was definitely doing that work where he was out with the people.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
literally walking Selma. You know,
Yeah.
like all of these movies, people are like, I'm tired of black pain, I'm tired of black struggle. It's like, no, we have to make these movies because people need to understand that
Hmm.
these weren't people who were in the White House. I mean, they were in the White House, they were going in, but these aren't people who were just in the White House. These are people who were on the bus,
Yes.
literally.
Yes. They were human. And one of the things we as human beings love more than our heroes is to tear them down, right? Like that's part of the societal narrative, right? And I think that's important that we remain humble enough to actually be genuine in these spaces and admit, like, hey, I'm still going through stuff. I'm still working. Like,
Mm,
I love that you open and said, like, through thousands of hours of therapy, we have to normalize the reality that the Malcolm X that we see on posters went through a process. The Martin Luther King that we talk about went through a process. And that's important because our process is no different.
it's not.
I always tell people that in order to be great, you have to go through the process of greatness. There's a reason why kings go through etiquette and they have to learn certain stuff because in order for you to show up in a certain space, you have to learn what that is. I had to learn what a gang member was. I was not raised, or excuse me, I was not born a gang member. I learned that culture, that mindset, those mannerisms. I had to unlearn those things. So now today I have to learn who is Fred and know in order for me to be truly effective, I no longer wear masks. I'm no longer trying to hide who I am. I wear hats. I have different roles. That's part of the human experience is that I'm not the same person when I'm with my daughter than I am when I'm facilitating the group. But I am aware now. It's no longer subconscious. I'm no longer in survival mode. I am in thriving mode. My
Mm.
goal is to thrive.
Um, Brother Cash put this in the chat, and it's Malcolm X after his pilgrimage to Mecca became a new man, and that transformation that you're talking about in becoming a servant leader, which is what you're talking about. And this is
Mm,
what we literally do at Golden Global is we put people through a transformation. I'm getting ready to work with an incredible organization in Barstow next week as a executive coach, and that's part of what we're doing with them is we're putting them through this pilgrimage in a way of saying, hey, there's some things that we have to work on internally. The
mm,
reason why it's hard for a lot of people to navigate and move into these spaces of becoming servants, and I imagine, especially after incarceration, is that it hurts.
mm,
It's painful. This isn't easy. It's not easy to go back into your life, into your childhood, to talk about grief, to talk about betrayal, to deal with sexual abuse, to deal with the shame that you felt like what you did to your community. That stuff is not easy to do. And
mm,
so I could see why a lot of brothers, I was about to say something else, why a lot of brothers today are like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and get this 40. I'm going to go ahead and roll these blunts up because it's a way of um, numbing numbing that feeling. But what I know about brothers who come out of incarceration, I've been working in this field since 2005. This is my
mhm,
20th year working in the justice community. And what I know about them is that they have a spirit, regardless of what happens when they come out, we get caught up, recidivism does its thing, but there's a spirit of wanting
mm.
to do something to lift their families up. There's a spirit of wanting to do something to lift the community, but sometimes everybody doesn't make it. Some
Right.
people do go back inside. Some people
Mhm,
do unfortunately die. And I just I think that your words are so powerful and important. If you could say something to people who are returning from jail and prison that need to be uplifted,
Mm.
that need to know things are going to be okay, what would you say?
I would first say, welcome home. And I would ask them to show themselves grace and to tell themselves that it's okay that you're experiencing fear, nervousness, anxiety. You have embarked on a journey that has gotten you here, but that was only one step, right? Like you got out of prison, now you have to stay out of prison.
Mm,
And I would encourage them, connect with a community, tap in with your resources, because the greatest fear for someone coming home that I've experienced and I've seen come up constantly is, who am I now? Did the things I've learned, are they transferable? And my answer to you is yes. You have a resilience, you have a creativity, you have an initiative that oftentimes most people never experience because they never had to be in a state of oppression that we were in inside. But there's also a need for you to stay connected and to know that there are people out here like myself and other organizations that we care, and we want to provide you with the safety, your support, the encouragement, and the accountability you need to reach those next levels. But the same way that when you were hurting, you didn't hurt alone, you can't heal alone. You may have worked on your childhood trauma, but the trauma of prison itself is now going to start knocking at your door. And I would strongly encourage you to tap in with people who can help you navigate that. Get into therapy, find you a support group, find you some people who are system impacted, who can help you navigate the things that are going to come up for you. But ultimately, show yourself grace and never forget what you found inside.
what you just explained, and I had to, I'll be taking notes because y'all have me in the classroom, but showing grace to yourself, connecting with the community, and you can't heal alone.
Mm,
These are, I just got chills again. These are core tenets of servant leadership.
mm,
Like these are the things that we teach leaders to do. And so as you're talking, what it reminds me is that people who are coming out of jail and prison, they're just as much leaders as we are,
yeah,
as Dr. King
absolutely.
is, as the people that we see on TV or that we read about in the newspaper. And should we start to think about reframing what it means to come home? Like in my mind, I think I've had hundreds of students who have come out of jails and prisons and entered our programs. Or we've taught people who are in jail and prison who are literally leaders on the yard,
Right.
who are saying, "Yeah, I'm doing a life bid, but I'm going to use my time here to be a certified peer support professional for the people on this yard at Valley State Prison or at
Yes.
Lancaster State Prison or in San Diego or in the towers or Men's Central." Like these are people who are saying, "I am already a leader. I'm
Hmm.
being like I'm leading my community," and so I think that that's really important. So then we know that leadership isn't just for people with power. Leadership really is for
Mm.
people who serve. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it's reframing what power is. Power is the ability to influence someone to do better. Like that is true power. Like this is why we're still talking about Malcolm X 60 years later, because he influenced people to be better, do better, see things better. And the reality is, the narrative for people coming home is they need money. Give them resources, give them somewhere to go, give them something to eat. And all of those things are true. But more than anything is we need the emotional support to deal with reentry trauma itself. The trauma of reintegrating into a society we no longer feel that we belong in, that we were shamed. Like the system itself shames us for the crimes we did because they want criminals to be ashamed of their behavior. It's not enough to stay in shame. You have to move forward to heal from shame and then to step into the mindset of thriving. But that's not what this system is set up for. The system is set up to punish us. And
Hmm.
so we have to reframe what reentry looks like. Reentry is about providing holistic support for human beings coming home, wanting to be of service and to like feel so valued.
See, I
That
had a,
is what we have to reframe. That is the goal. That is the reality because it's 2025. Like, it's not
I,
too many households in our neighborhoods that's not system impacted.
and I'm tired. Like we are tired of this cycle of abuse of black men and of our black families in this country. I think that is the pain that Malcolm carried every day, and they
Mm,
killed him. And I think about like the words I'm hearing you speak are very similar to what Malcolm was saying is we don't need an amen. Like we just need the humanity piece. We need to be seen as human beings that are
mm,
worthy of having the things that everybody else has on this earth.
mm,
And I don't think we're asking for too much. And I think about our brothers and sisters inside and that are returning the same way.
mhm,
If prison has become the new slavery, then let my people go.
mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think back to what Bruce put in the chat about Malcolm X going to Mecca and having his thought process shift because he saw that there were Muslims that were not black, right? Like that was one of, and not even just the race, just the way that they treated him changed his expression of what it meant to be submitted to the will of God. And for me, it's a similar reality. Like I went to prison, and even today, most of my friends are not black. And what it was that I realized the similarities, not only in me and these individuals, but the culture, but also in the oppression. And I realized you're not my enemy. The systems that be are what I need to fight against. And that's why I continue to throw my name in the hat, continue to show up to the table because like my fight is for humanity. Yes, black people were being oppressed. Yes, the trauma has been intentional on so many levels. Yes, the Willie Lynch letters are still in play, and I ain't trying to get you canceled. But the reality is,
Well, you can say
as
what you want.
as MLK said, right, as long as one person is being oppressed, there is no justice. There is no justice. We can't say we're the land of the free and have 25% of the world's population in prison.
It's just all of this is first of all, I'm just really proud of you, and I think that's where my emotions right now are coming from because we need you around, and there's a part of me that is scared. When we become these servants, that we won't last in these roles. They'll either burn
Mm,
us out or they'll take us out, and we need you. Your community needs you. Um, what you said about the unity between all people, that is my core philosophy, is that we are all one. Just like the Frankie Beverly song, like when one of us hurts on this planet, when one thing hurts, like we all hurt. And so it's convincing people that we are. That's been really difficult.
yeah.
And Fred, I'm very proud of you. I think the work that you do, how you have the Winans have a song called Restoration, and you remind me of that, restoring yourself, not just making amends or in the form of restorative justice, but you had to restore your heart and you had to
Mm,
settle the things that you went through so that you could pour into others the way that you do today. We
yeah.
need you, brother.
I will leave you with this. First of all, thank you, and I received that. Um, Getting affirmation from my elders is important. Um, a lot of the things I did because I sought praise from the people that I looked up to. So I want to thank you for that affirmation. I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Joseph in the Bible, but briefly, Joseph was incarcerated for something he did not do, and while inside, he met the chief butler, who eventually will be the person who would lift him up to become second to the king of Egypt. And for a long time, I used to pray and ask God, like, when am I going to meet my butler? Who's going to be that
Mm.
person that's going to connect me, uplift me? And one day, God responded and said, "What makes you think you're Joseph in the story?" And I was like, "I don't understand." And he was like, "You're not innocent. You know the things you've done. You're the butler. Go find somebody and help them be who I've called them to be." And so when you speak about the transformation, when you speak about what you see, all I hear is the reminder and the demand to give praise to God, who found me in the midst of my chaos and said, "Let me repurpose that pain into medicine. Let me turn what you feel right now into what could be a bridge for someone else." And that is my goal, is to be the butler to uplift the next Malcolm X, the next Martin Luther King, the next Kamala, whoever it may be. All they may need is somebody to lift their hand up. All they may need is for somebody to say, "Hey, that wasn't okay." Because supporting people isn't always affirming them, it's also holding them accountable.
Amen.
And so I did not want to leave this space without saying, if it wasn't for the grace of God, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have a servant's heart. God is ultimately the greatest server. And so that is what I'm going to continue to tap in. If I die, let it be. I was willing to die for a gang that didn't belong to me. I was willing to die for my ego. I was willing to die for shame. I am willing to die to present another model, another example of what blackness looks like, what
Mm.
healing looks like.
And that's why you were perfect to come on the Golden Light Academy Talk series. Brother, I am sending you so much peace, so much joy, and thank you for your spirit. Um, we have to do this again for sure. And, Bruce is already talking about, I want to get back and do something with the three of us.
My guy.
So that sounds very, very dynamic. It sounds like
Yeah.
a longer part series, but no, I'm grateful for you, and I wish you everything that you can um, that you can absorb and that you can have. All right, Fred. Thank you
Thank you.
so much. God bless
Have a-
you, and thank you for being the servant that you are.
Absolutely.
Okay, listen. Um, now that Fred is gone, I need y'all to know that I wrote down several notes of things that he said. One, were being able to show grace to yourself, connecting with community, the power of not healing alone, what it's like going inside having survivor's remorse, but then being able to come back out and to use the people who are inside that are rooting you on as a way of building yourself up, of remembering where you came from, of celebrating and lifting your community up. And this piece about restoration. Ultimately, grief is a part of all of our human journeys, but we understand that healing is possible. Black men, people of color, people who have been incarcerated need safe spaces to process, heal, and rebuild. It's called restoration. That's the building of the servant leader. And then the system does not define us. Our actions moving forward do. We just learned that Malcolm X was the original peer support specialist. I'm going to write that article, and that's going to be done within the next couple months. And the final call that I want to give you guys is make sure that you follow Fred on Instagram, on LinkedIn, where we get it going, and learn more about post incarceration support groups and mentorship programs. We all are responsible for lifting our community in the same way that Malcolm X and our leaders have done. Watch and share this episode on YouTube and LinkedIn. And a shout out to Brother Malcolm X. aka Detroit Red, who has lifted and inspired so many of us to be who we are. I'm so sorry that you were killed, but I am so grateful for the work that you did so that we might be free. And we are still working to get there. But as long as I'm on this planet, that's what I'll be doing. Be courageous, be humble, be safe, but most importantly, be healed. See y'all next week with an incredible artist named Samir, who's one of my dear friends, and looking forward. Be blessed.